Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you here tonight. We had that kind of silent lull, which kind of says I think everyone's ready to start. And there's a few people coming in, but we'll let them take their seats as I speak so that once our speaker begins, everyone's seated. My name is Joel Lohr. I am president of Hartford Seminary. I have the pleasure and honor of serving this great institution that so many of you know about already. But we're just delighted by the speaker that we have with us tonight, who I will not introduce. We will have Timur give a proper introduction, but I did have the joy of sitting with him for dinner tonight. And I said to someone on my way in, I said, if our talk tonight is anything like our dinner tonight, we're in for a real treat. I am just delighted that we have not only a scholar of scholars, someone who, as we will hear from Timur, is truly at the top of his field and is a very able scholar of religion and Islam, but also is a true human being and a lovely person. And I think we're in for a real treat tonight. So I welcome you to Hartford Seminary. If you don't know much about the seminary, I encourage you on your way out to just take all the literature you can and share it with your friends. We don't want to be Hartford or even Connecticut's best kept secret. We really want others to learn about Hartford Seminary. Why is it that nowhere else in this country could a woman go to seminary except right here in 1889, the very first seminary in the country to welcome women? Why is it that the seminary, so early in its history through Duncan Black MacDonald, came to study Islam and Muslim-Christian relations right here in Hartford? There's something special about this place in Hartford Seminary, which I just feel honored to be part of this tradition. And so tonight is along those lines. We will hear a wonderful talk. I'm looking forward to the topic. And I'm going to allow Professor Timur Yuskayev to introduce our speaker. So will you join me in welcoming Timur?
Hello. So, where do I start? Let me start at the heart. So today I was thinking about how I'm going to introduce Dr. Lawrence, and one trick I learned in from his seminars was to look for key words, key phrases that speak to the occasion, that connect realities. The word I learned from him is shibboleth, a key word, a word that unlocks reality. And then it just so happened that I ran into some poetry. And there it goes. Love is inventive. If you have real love, you are inventive. If you do not love, you have no ideas, nothing comes to your mind, you are just neutral. Everything is absent, everything is negative. Love is inventive. If you love, you try to find out. You're interested. You want to know what the people do and how they live. Love is interested, and you really want to know. If you love the people, it will help a great deal in service. Most of it you have to find out on the spot. The other is theoretical. Theory is very good, but you have to coordinate it, weigh it, and adapt it. If we love, we really try to serve and not just work. We can work all day, but a person may not even want what we do, and it may not really help. But truly to serve and not simply work, love brings this out. And if you have no love, even with a lot of knowledge, you will not achieve anything. The reason why it came to me, I think many things, there are reasons, and it comes from, on the surface, it has nothing to do with Dr. Lawrence. This is a poem that was written by, apparently, an anonymous collective of women in Philadelphia who were reflecting on Mother Anna Dengel's definitions of love, and I ran across it because of Empty Winter. But when I ran across it, I remembered my favorite quote from one of Dr. Lawrence's 15 books. And that is a book he does not mention in the biography that you will find on our website announcing this event. And the book is called New Faiths, Old Fears, Muslims and Other Asian Immigrants in American Religious Life. And the quote is very simple. To acknowledge is to challenge. To challenge is to change. When I teach from that book, I try to help my students see Dr. Lawrence's scholarship as, yes, highly intellectually fulfilling, yes, erudite, yes, precise, but there is heart in it. When he says to acknowledge is to challenge, it is not a game. To challenge is to change is not just an intellectual pursuit. There is love in his scholarship. And you can see it if you are careful sometimes in the pages that we skip when we look through books. That particular book he dedicates to his father, Joseph Stagg Lawrence, a Hungarian immigrant, the marvel and mainstay of his own immigrant imagination. Knowing Dr. Lawrence for now, over 10 years, more, 15, 20, 25, I don't know. I recognize that there is providence, perhaps to use a Christian term, in the fact that Dr. Lawrence, like a bird, keeps flying back to Hartford Seminary. Every once in a while, in a few years, you will see Dr. Lawrence at Hartford Seminary. There is some kind of, I'm at the seminary, divine or divinely inspired, perhaps, resonance between how he does his scholarship, to acknowledge is to challenge is to change, to recognize and appreciate the differences, to appreciate the humanity in one another. Dr. Lawrence's scholarship is human-centered. Beyond the 15 books, beyond his status as emeritus professor of the highest caliber at Duke University and his current role at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, behind all of that, behind his interest in the Quran and in South Asian Muslim expressions and histories, his scholarship is human-centered. And that is why, once again, and hopefully I will say it many times again, Dr. Lawrence, welcome home.
Well, thank you, Timur, and thank all of you for coming out here tonight on a night which made me wonder what was it like, the weather like the last time I came to Hartford. I think it was a little bit cheerier, but I hope that I will say some things tonight that help you weather whatever condition you find when you go back out. And Timur, thank you for that glorious introduction. And I have to say, truthfully, I like the poetry better than the commentary, but thank you for both. I really appreciate it. And since he mentioned the book, which I'm not talking about tonight, I should just say that I am a son of immigrants. My father was a Hungarian refugee to America. And it's really quite remarkable to think that I wrote that book and had it finished writing before 9/11. And then 9/11 came, and I felt I had to go back and change and rethink the prism of that whole book. And I did, and published it. And so someone said, well, what was the really major thing you realized? I said, I realized I have an even deeper debt of gratitude to my father than I realized, because not only did he come to America from Hungary, he didn't come, his parents brought him. He was the oldest of 13 children, 11 of whom were born here in the United States, but he was born in Chico, Hungary. But one of the things I was really grateful is that he was drafted into the First World War. I'm not grateful for the draft, but I'm grateful for the fact that in the First World War, the United States was fighting Germany. And so one of the requirements of him serving in the army is he had to change his name. So Lawrence is not my real name. This is just to let you know. But why am I grateful that he changed his name to Lawrence? Because his name, and I'm not joking, before he changed it, was Schmaltz. So some of you are laughing. Those of you who aren't laughing don't know what Schmaltz means. Whatever else it means, I want you to know that if I had become an academic and my initials had been my name, BS, it would have been an even tougher road than it's been. So thank you, Timur, for bringing up that book and bringing up that recollection about my father. And thank you for the story he was going to tell, which he didn't tell. Let me just say that, Timur is really good, but he promised me he was going to tell one story about me that I would really find very embarrassing. So it was too embarrassing for him to tell, but maybe not for me, although you may think I'm wrong when I say it. So he said, I've known Professor Lawrence long enough. I remember when he had a mustache. Now, you say, well, I've seen pictures of him, no picture with a mustache. Well, it was because in 2006, I was invited to teach at UIN-JKT, University Negara Jakarta, which is a wonderful Islamic university in Indonesia. And this is 2006, 5 years after 9/11. And one of my friends was really upset about it. I said, no, Indonesia's a nice place. My wife is invited. We're both going to go there. It's a place I'd visited but never taught before. I was looking forward to it. He said, but the terrorists will get you there. I said, no, the terrorists, don't worry about the terrorists. I'm going to have wonderful students, and I know the people there. And he wouldn't relent. He wouldn't relent. And finally he said, you can do one thing that will put the terrorists off. I said, what's that? He said, shave off your mustache. I said, if that's what it takes, she's laughing. I was laughing too. If that's what it takes to make you feel happy, I shaved off the mustache and it's never come back. So Timur knew me before I went to Indonesia. That's how long we go back. Before 2006 was when I went to Indonesia. And I would never have written the book about which I'm going to talk tonight on who is Allah, except after 9/11, the other thing that happened is that with a colleague from University of North Carolina, and people always say that's a joke. You don't have colleagues from North Carolina, just enemies. I said, no. I'm from Duke. I have a dark blue shirt on, some more dark blue, but I appreciate light blue. And I especially appreciate light blue from UNC because my closest colleague is also my closest friend, Carl Ernst. And some of you are nodding your heads, so you've heard of Carl Ernst. And if you haven't heard of him, you should. He's a wonderful man. And after 9/11, somebody from UNC said, you must start a series that does a counter-narrative on Muslims in America and in the world. And what will you call it? And we said, oh, it's easy. We'll call it Muslim Networks. Well, guess what? It was turned down. The UNC press said, if we do Muslim Networks after 9/11, everyone would think we're interested only in terrorists. No. It's going to be much better, much bigger than that. No, you have to change it. So we went back to the drawing boards and we said, okay, if we're going to talk about networks, how can we disguise it? Oh, I know, Islamic civilization. So we renamed it, we reapplied, we got the series. It is called, by the way, Islamic Civilization and Muslim Networks. And my book, Who is Allah, comes out in that series. As a series which now has published 25 books. And we're really happy with the fact that Islamic civilization qualifies Muslim networks, and I hope you will think it's also a worthwhile endeavor to think about who is Allah. So when I was going to do this lecture, I thought, how do I start it? I want to start it with something you won't forget. Everything I say from now on, other than Timur's wonderful poem, is forgettable, but this, I hope, will not be forgettable. This is the image of one of the surahs. I'm not presuming that all of you know about the Quran. I know that there's some Muslims in the audience, but I also know there's some non-Muslims. So there are 114 chapters in the Holy Quran, and one of them is especially my favorite. There are lots that I like, but some that I have to say are more my favorite than others. And the one that's my top favorite of all is Surah Al-Duha, D-U-H-A. It's the 93rd, if you're counting, the 93rd surah. And this is it. And you say, well, why did you put it up there in Arabic? And what is this funny color scheme? It's purple and green. The reason I put it up there because this is Surah Al-Duha from Aceh, which you may not know is a little part of Indonesia. It's a province in Indonesia which is extremely strong in its Arabic background because it was settled by Arabs from southern Yemen and still retains a very strong Arabic ethos. But I particularly like this chapter and this rendition of it because it starts at the top. If you don't recognize the Arabic, it's Allah at the top, and it goes all the way down to the bottom and just has an open-ended thing at the bottom which just says, and this is for the glorious light. This is in Indonesia, I'm translating, and this is the glorious light. And it says the glorious light because it's taken from the translation by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. So the word duha can be many things. It can be sunlight, morning light, but glorious morning light was a phrase coined by Abdullah Yusuf Ali, who was a 20th century Indian bureaucrat who spent all of his spare time reading and studying and then translating the Holy Quran. And he called this Surah Duha the glorious morning light. And this initial slide is an artistic reinterpretation of Surah Duha by the Indonesian artist A.D. Perus. And it's a tribute to the surah, but also to the allure of its imagery reflecting natural light, divine wisdom as intermingled. It also marks the enduring and cryptic impact of translation. And that is my point, is that the translation is the translation of an Indian Muslim who was a British civil servant because he was there during the time of the British rule of South Asia. And at the bottom in Arabic script is written, Demi Cahaya Pagi Yang Kamalang, which is for the glorious morning light. And if you saw nothing else except that in this previous image, this is at the very bottom, this is Dami Chahangi Chongan Palala. If you saw nothing but that, you would know that this is derived from the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali, because only he, when he uses it, translates it as the glorious morning light. Why is that important? Because here is Abdullah Yusuf Ali's rendition. Al-Duha, in the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful, by the glorious morning light, and by the night when it is still, thy guardian Lord hath not forsaken thee, nor is he displeased. And verily the hereafter will be better for thee than the present. And soon will thy guardian Lord give thee that wherewith thou shalt be well pleased. And then a series of rhetorical questions. Did he not find thee an orphan and give thee shelter and care? And found thee wandering and gave thee guidance? And found thee in need and made thee independent? Therefore, treat not the orphan with harshness, nor repulse the petitioner unheard, but the bounty of thy Lord rehearse and proclaim. So this is the English translation by Abdullah Yusuf Ali, and I could compare it with other translations, but I just want to pick one word. The very beginning of it, you may have thought I went over it very quickly, but the very beginning is, in the name of God. And so in Arabic, it's the basmala. It's called Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And here he's translating the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. But Marmaduke Pickthall, who is another translator of the Holy Quran into English, and when he translated, he said, you can translate the whole of the Quran, but you can't translate the word Allah. Allah is only Allah in Arabic. Allah can never be God. And this is his argument. Opted to provide an introductory note before his whole translation, where he said, I retain the word Allah throughout because there is no corresponding word in English. The word Allah has neither feminine nor plural, has never been applied to anything other than the unimaginable supreme being. It uses the word God, small g, in quotation marks, only when the corresponding word ilah, which means a God, is found in the source text. Now, that's a reasonable argument, but it means that you can't translate Allah. You must retain the word Allah. Even if you translate every other word in the Quran, you must retain Allah for God. But here's one other person who's also a scholar of the Quran, also like the previous one, a Muslim. Though most of the references to the Quran are to God, the interpreter does not know what God is like. And here is the key thing. There's no knowable correspondence between the interpreter's understanding of the term God and what God actually is. This is so close to what I myself believe that I want to say it again, and you can note this down. I put it in bold letters. There's no knowable correspondence between the interpreter's understanding of the term God and what God actually is. And the person to confirm that says, listen to the Quran itself, which refers to this when it says, Laisa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing like unto him, on Quran 42:11. This comes from Abdullah Sa'id interpreting the Quran. So I argue that what we really have, going back to a man named Imam Ghazali, I know there's some people here from a class that's looking at the name of God, so you've heard of Ghazali. Almost anybody who thinks about Islam seriously and studies it, it'd be the same thing if you were doing Judaism and doing Jewish thought, you'd study Maimonides. If you're doing Christian thought, you'd study Augustine or Aquinas. If you're doing Muslim thought, you have to study either Ibn Sina, another very famous person, or Ghazali, or preferably both. So this is Ghazali, late 11th, early 12th century, from one of his books, Qanun al-Ta'wil, the book for studying interpretation. Literally, Qanun is what gives us the word canon in English, the canon or bedrock for interpretation. And here's what is said as a translation from Ghazali's Qanun al-Ta'wil. One must refrain from specifying one interpretation when various possibilities seem incompatible. Judgment concerning the intention of God is dangerous. I think it's almost too oblique. It's very dangerous to presume that you know the intention of God. One knows the intention of a speaker only when he reveals his intention, but various possibilities in the speech of Arabs. By the way, Ghazali was an Iranian or Persian. I prefer to say Persian than Iranian, and so Arabic for him was a second language. But possibilities in speech of Arabs and the ways of expanding upon them are many, so how can they be limited? It's better to refrain from advocating one interpretation over all others, neither God over Allah nor God over Allah, but both of them together. And I call this a pluralist interpretation, because pluralism means that you're not relativist and you're not dogmatic, but you are looking for different ways of thinking about the same reality. So I have one word, and if there's one word which I would like to leave with you as kind of the linchpin of my interpretation, I realized that, of course, I'm echoing exactly what Timur said about me, that I think key words are crucial. So I hope you'll remember the title of my lecture was Who is Allah, Why It Matters. But I hope the other word you'll remember after Allah is the word B-A-R-Z-A-K-H. So it's 4 letters, B-R-Z-K-H, and then the vowel bar, A, which is repeated. Barzakh has 4 letters, 4 consonants, which is really unusual for Arabic. In fact, it's not an Arabic word. It's a Persian word, but it comes up in the Quran, so therefore it's revealed, therefore it's accepted as part of the Arabic Quran, a Persian word, barzakh, which literally means the space between 2 spaces. And so I, in my humble opinion, think that the best way to understand Allah, or Allah Ta'ala, or the notion of God in the Quran, is to understand it as barzakh, as a space between 2 spaces. It's both and it's neither nor. It can't be explained in binary logic, but it also can't be excluded from comparison. So I use this metaphor of the ocean, the wave coming out and going back, but actually I also use this image. And part of the reason why the cover of my book has a hu, which is a hu from huwa, hu Allah, ahad Allah, samad lam yalid walam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, comes from Surah Al-Ikhlas. The reason why that hu is there is the same reason why here I have put up an image from the Quran, from Surah Ar-Rahman, and it's not just simply a quotation, but it's a visualization of what the barzakh means. It literally means, between them is a barrier or a place which they cannot exceed. So this barrier in between, if you see the green on one side, the red on the other, I apologize for the fact that this is Arabic, but some of you know Arabic, some of you don't. But the strongest note in between there is a long curved letter that goes, I don't have a visualization on this, but if you see from the top down, it is the second part of the la, which means no. So what's visualized is what's also the meaning of this, that there is, and they're exactly equal. So the 2 parts are exactly equal, they're red and white, one is the inversion of the other. So the picture, and by the way, it's done by Ahmed Mustafa, who's an amazing 20th century and now 21st century Egyptian British calligrapher. Both of them say there is between them, that is between 2 oceans, the barzakh. And I have in my book here, I have a long passage where I talk about barzakh and talk about how it's between 2 things, but I'm not going to read it. This page is 40 and 41. But the one part of it that is really important is where it says, Allah is the one who released 2 waters, one fresh and one sweet, one salty and one bitter, and put a gap between them, a barrier a barzakh. So the barzakh is the battery, and I don't know how many of you are scientists, but if you have a geologist friend, ask them what happens when salt water flows into fresh water. Or if some of you ever go out to the Gulf and you know there's a place called Bahrain. You've heard of the name Bahrain? Well, Bahrain literally means two oceans. But what Bahrain means is salty on the top and fresh underneath. So there actually is a physical component of it. It's not like some theological concepts which you can say if you believe it, fine. If you don't, forget it. This is actually there's a physical basis for the barzakh as literally that space between salt and fresh water, which is neither fresh nor salt, but it combines them so it's both fresh and salt. So I think that conundrum, let's call it a conundrum, that puzzle, is part of what one faces every time one tries to define Allah or Allah Ta'ala. And here I think it's graphically epitomized by Ahmed Mustafa in this particular drawing. He also has done something which is remarkable. One of my trips took me out to Qatar, and I was privileged to have the end of Ramadan, to have what's called the iftar, the break at the end of Ramadan, with the wife of the emir. Her name is Sheikha Moza, and she was very proud of this cube that she had there. She said, Professor Lawrence, let me show you this cube. It has what is called the 99 names, the Asma al-Husna, for those of you who know Arabic, or the Asma al-Husna. And she showed me this cube, and I said, thank you, Sheikha Moza. It's just like the one I have at home. And I don't say this to stand her up, but just to say that I had heard of this from this particular artist. I liked it so much that when I saw him, I asked him if I could have one, and he said, you can't afford it, but I'll give it to you. So I got this, and this is the cube. And what is it? If you close it up, it's the Kaaba. Any of you Muslims know what the Kaaba looks like on the right. But if you open it up, it has opened up all of the 99 names of God. So this is both a container and opener. It is itself a representation of the barzakh. It contains everything and nothing. It's all of the names and none of the names at the same time. So I want to end this with kind of a reflection on the names. And by the way, I spent all of yesterday with a good friend of mine who teaches at Yale University, Shaukat Turawa. I mention him often in several of my books. He was for a number of years the imam or Muslim chaplain at Cornell. He's now become a lowly professor at Yale, but it gives him more time to work and to engage offbeat friends like me with conversations about the Quran. So we were talking yesterday, he said, Bruce, when you're talking to the folks in Hartford, make sure you emphasize that the Asma al-Husna are not names, they're epithets. So for those of you who are into linguistic distinctions, the literal translation, and by the way, many people, including most devout Muslims I know who write about the Asma al-Husna, call them the beautiful names or the beautiful names of God. But here's somebody who's not only a devout Muslim, but a very passionate scholar, and he said, the more I think about it, the word ism, which translates as name, cannot be name, it has to be something beyond name. And so that means that, now I said, well, wait a minute, but there's also this whole tradition, don't reflect on his dhatihi, on his essence, but reflect on his characteristics, his sifat. I'm not going to use too much Arabic. I don't want to lose people who don't know Arabic. But there is already in the Islam a notion that the names are not the essence of whatever is meant by Allah. And it's in this thing that says, تَفَكْرُ لَا عَلَى ذَاتِهِ وَعَلَى صِفَاتِهِ. Don't reflect on his dhat, if you like to translate it D-H-A-T, but reflect on his sifat, his qualities. So the sifat are the qualities, or if you will, they are the representation, but they are not the actual names of God. So in that sense, they are descriptors. And I would like to give this kind of reflection on the descriptors or epithets of God. In election year, Muslims have become again a hot topic, but not many people have drilled down to what are Muslim views on the most important topic in their lives, Allah. So Allah is more than a deity. He's also the linchpin for everyday sensibilities that shape Muslims from Dakar, Senegal, to Jakarta, Indonesia, as well as Western Europe and North America. And if you've never done this, I would encourage you, beyond remembering Allah and barzakh, this website, I Love Allah. And I didn't tell Timur to talk about love so people could remember to read love, or as my friend Ami Safi says, love, when you look at this. But I love Allah, with three A's, A-L-L-A-A, because when you pronounce it, it's Allah. So there's an accent on the second A that's not there on the first. So the website picks this up, iloveallah.com, and I checked it before coming up here to give this lecture, and it has almost 10 million likes and daily postings that garner thousands of likes, as did the one posted here, which I went back to fall 2016 to see what it said. Ya Allah, make this day for us a better day than yesterday. Make it a day of mercy, success, victory, and full of blessings and guidance from you, Ya Rab. Ya Rab means, O Lord. Save us from all trials, diseases, and distresses. Allahumma ameen. In the name of God, amen. And so I have this reflection on it. Well, much can be said about, I call it mercy in the cracks, or experiencing mercy daily. Much can be said about the wording of this prayer, but for those unacquainted with Islam, the key invocation is the first word, or the first phrase, make it a day of mercy. So I would argue that the central defining quality of Allah, phonetically spelled Allah, is mercy. The phrase that flows through a Muslim day is inshallah, if God will. And the phrase that marks each meal is Bismillah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And the immediate sequel to Bismillah is the two qualifiers, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, God, the one full of mercy, God, the one given mercy. So before I finish this, let me just say that I recently had surgery in the hospital. It was roughly 8 months ago. And if any of you have ever had serious surgery in the hospital, you know the key thing is not the doctor or the operation, it's the night nurses. I see a couple nodded heads. So one of my night nurses was a Muslim. How did I know? Because she was wearing a scarf. And she came in and she said, how are you? And I said, Alhamdulillah, I'm fine. Oh, she said, so you're a Muslim. I said, no, I'm not a Muslim, but I appreciate the benefit of Islam, and I do include a lot of Islam in my daily reflection, especially when I'm in the hospital. And so she said, oh, well, that's really great. She said, you probably know more about Islam than me because I'm just a simple nurse, and my husband doesn't want me to study Arabic. Oh, I said, you know, that's too bad, but, you know, you should do some in your free time. And she said, well, I don't know whether I have free time because this, and then she gave me the whole roll call of her life. I was sick, I was in the hospital, so I was glad to listen to her as long as she wanted to talk. But finally, at one point I said, but you do at least know Rahman ar-Rahim. Oh, she said, of course, I say my prayers, I know Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I said, what is Rahman? Well, I don't know, Rahman is the basis because it's Arabic. For those who don't know Arabic, it's the RHM that is a stem for both Rahman, which has an N at the end, and Rahim, which has a long I between the H and the M, but they come from the same root, R-H-M. I said, no, I don't know what that means. I said, well, Rahman is womb, which is what it is in Arabic. So it means that the first descriptions of Allah Ta'ala, of God Almighty in the Quran, are feminine. Oh, she said, but God is a man. I said, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. I don't want to say Allah is God or God is male or female, but I do think it's really interesting if you take the Quran to be revelation, which at some deep level I do, that the two first descriptors are not male but female, not masculine but feminine. And she said, oh, that's really nice, but I can't tell my husband that. I said, yes, you can, because it's the Quran. I mean, if it's in the Quran, then he ought to be able to accept it as well as you. She said, would you write that down? So I wasn't feeling too good, but I could still write it down. I wrote it down, explained it to her. I didn't see her. I thought, oh, she got put on another duty. She said, I'm not going to go back and see that guy again. But 2 nights later, she came back and she said, you know, I showed it to my husband, and he said, I don't believe he's right. So he wrote to the imam back in Egypt who knows all this, and he wrote back and said, that was the lesson I didn't teach you. So it was a confirmation, and it came from Egypt, so, you know, anything from Egypt is right. But I thought that was the wonderful healing part of my surgery and my hospital care was this wonderful night nurse, and I can't describe to you the wonderful things she did for and with me. But I did one thing for her, which was to encourage her to think about the Quran creatively as a woman who was already reflected in the name of God. So even if whatever you think about how Islam evolves with patriarchal norms and all the notions that some associate, but the very essence of Islam, even if you think names are descriptors and not names, the very first description, for those of you who know a little bit of Arabic, you may realize that if you think of that in terms of feminine masculine, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, even before you get to the rest of Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the most important, as well as the first surah in the Quran, you have Rahman ar-Rahim 4 times, So the women are really ahead, and you only have Rabb al-Alameen and Malik, Maliki Yawm-ud-Din. You only have three masculine and 4 echoes of feminine traits in the very first part of the Quran. I think women come out ahead. So that's, I know it's heretical, but you know, I'm only here in Hartford on visit, so I can be heretical and leave tonight. No, but seriously, when you think about this in terms of Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, it's the same word, but there is repetition but never redundancy in the Quran. So some words can be repeated, but they never mean the same thing. There's always another echo of a different layer, a different level. And so I think Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim is different between the two of them, but also between one full of mercy and one ever giving mercy. And by the way, the one thing that you must do if you're talking to people who don't know Arabic or aren't Muslim or both, you must give the same word twice in English. So what I often say insistently to people, while I appreciate other translations, if they don't have mercy or compassion, or if you want benevolence, but if you use it in the first one for Rahman, you have to use it in the second one for Rahim. So my favorite actually is to say, if I translate the Basmala, is in the name of God, full of compassion, ever compassionate. But to use compassion twice. Or if you like mercy, full of mercy, ever merciful. Or if you want to use all adjectives, all merciful, ever merciful. But you have to have the echo of the first and the second, a repetition, but not a redundancy from the first and the second. So, to repeat and to go on with this little anecdote, this little story, to make each day a day of mercy is to look each action, event, each moment, and hour for the source of mercy, the fountain giver of mercy, which is Allah. So, but there's something else which is not so happy, and many people have a struggle with it in Islam. There is a deep resource from their spiritual life as Muslims to ask Allah to make each day a day of mercy, but the struggle may seem less about mercy than about safety, because it's also about nurturing hope, and that is where Allah or Allah is more than a safety net. Allah is the hope for mercy or kindness after unspeakable destitution, delay, and often even death. And for all those who invoke Basmala, the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, each day, there's also the shadow of the many other names, of which there are 99. I'm not going to talk about them all now. I've only told you about 2, Rahman Rahim, and I'm going to tell you about one more in a minute. The source of mercy, the giver of mercy, the one who is also the one who possesses awe as well as kindness and mercy. So this is the question of theodicy. It comes up in Judaism. Why was Jerusalem ever destroyed and the Jewish people put in exile? It comes up in Christianity. Why, if Jesus was the Son of Man, did God allow, and the Son of God, why did God allow him to be killed in the cruel way he was killed? And in terms of Islam, if Islam is such a great religion, why are there so many Muslim refugees, and why are there so many events of great horror and destruction in the Muslim world? So this whole question is, did Allah cause the horror of the modern Middle East or the current world disorder? And I would say the answer to that is, at one level we don't know, but there is a hint of this in the cluster of divine names or divine attributes, because one of the names for Allah is Dhul Jalal wal Ikram. Dhul Jalali wal Ikram. I left out the last I for pronunciation purposes. The possessor of Jalal and Ikram. So Jalal is something like awe, and Ikram is something like mercy. So it literally means the one who possesses and projects both awe and mercy. The awe is the evident in the daily misery of refugees from every place, but the kindness, less visible, is also there. And I think it's really important that it's not Dhul Ikram or Jalal, it's Dhul Jalal wal Ikram. That the Ikram always comes with and often comes after the Jalal. And it's often through the Jalal that you can see this. And so I end with my favorite saint. I'm sorry for those of you who don't like Canadian music renegades, but Leonard Cohen is my hero. So here's my tribute to Leonard Cohen and to the Quran. I call trinkets of mercy amid gloom, light in the cracks of doom, and that's why I'm not a hip-hopper, because it doesn't work. These are small moments, trinkets of mercy in a world that seems packed with doom and gloom, but if one can say, I love Allah, and imagine the design of the one, the absolute, the other, all of which are ways in which you can think of the other as Allah, the one, the absolute, the other, as present even in cracks. One might also sing the anthem of Leonard Cohen in a Muslim key. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. So I want to end what I'm saying today with thanks to St. Leonard. For me, he's a saint. Thank you, St. Leonard. And thank you for your gift across time and space to all believers. And thank you for joining me in this reflection on Allah as the name above and beyond all names in Islam. Thank you. When I was contacted, someone said to me, "You can't talk for more than an hour." I said, "If I talk for more than 40 minutes, raise your hand." No hands went up. Because I feel there's so much to say, and I wanted to give you a kind of overview of some of the issues on which I've reflected, but I would really like to hear from you and try to respond any way I can, the best I hope I can, to questions that you have, either about what I've said, what I've written, what I've spoken, or even what can't be spoken but can be hinted at. So the floor is yours.
So we have the microphone for people who want to ask questions so that everybody can hear. So, oh, I can't give you the microphone, but you can shout from upstairs.
I just want to thank
Oh, Hussein, yes, Professor Kamali.
Professor Lawrence. We really appreciate your presentation. This was great. It was new information, even for those of us who study this professionally. I just want to excuse myself and my students. We have to go to class at this moment.
Oh, okay.
Really enjoyed your presentation. And thank you very much. We welcome you to Hartford. And I'll have to say good night.
Well, if you solve the problem of atomism in your class, would you send me an email?
I don't promise to solve anything.
Okay. Hussein, great to meet you. Thank you. And thank you, students, for coming.
Thank you. Professor Lawrence, thank you very much.
Yeah. Just tell me who you are, just so I
I'm
know.
Najib George Awad. I am the professor of Christian theology and Eastern Christian thought in Hartford Seminary. And I am one of those who know Arabic and who grew up as Arab. I am an Arab. I am from Syria originally.
Oh, great.
And definitely the word God, Allah, is very intimate to us. So thank you for your lecture indeed. I just feel there is something missing there though, if you allow me.
Sure.
I come from the Arab Eastern Christian community, and we also call God Allah. Allah is not the name of the Muslim God. For us, Christian Arabs who come from the Middle East, Allah is the name of God. That's our God too. And we also, those Eastern Christians who come from the Middle East and speak Syriac, they will tell you it is Aloho. And Aloho is also the word they use to speak about God. Also, when we go back to early Islam, to Arab Christian theology, we see all the mutakallims using the word Allah to speak about God without feeling that actually this is a different name from Theos or from Aloho. So I think, you know, definitely given your impressive long academic career and your wonderful books, I read some of them and I was privileged to do so. You do know that in the public domain, there is in the West that impression that Allah is associated with Islam alone. And that when you are a Muslim, you speak about Allah. If you're not a Muslim, then you say. And then Eastern Christians like me find themselves puzzled really in that barzakh. Because we do call God Allah definitely. And that's our Allah. Thank you.
No, well, thank you. Thank you for your witness and thank you for your question. My answer is yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, I'm guilty. Yes, there is a far greater resonance for Allah also among Christians. And I should also say, also among Hindus. In South Asia, where I spent time, there's very much some places in Tamil Nadu where they talk about Allah Nayan. And I say, well, well, Nayan is our local God, but Allah is the real God. These are Hindus. So there's a sense in which it also extends even beyond the Abrahamic arc that Allah is a name. And I had a wonderful chance to meet and to talk with your president, with Joel standing there in the back. I was looking, where's that tall guy? He's not sitting down, he's standing up. To your 6'8" president who stands about 7 foot tall. And I was talking to him and saying, that one of the things that is absolutely true is that you cannot separate yourself from your own experience. And the key thing for all of us when we're doing it is to recognize what are our pre-commitments when we are committed to doing something. And my pre-commitment was to try and interpret Allah through the prism of Muslims whom I have known in various places, and recognizing, and I say throughout my book in different places, especially in Malaysia, where I've also spent time as a visitor, but also as a teacher, but also as a student. And one of the things that was deep resentment is that Malay Christians who use the word Allah, yeah, they use the word Allah, are as privileged, but because of the strictures of the government, punished and deprived of using the word Allah in writing. So that, for instance, when it's used to translate into Malay Christian scripture, especially the New Testament, and the word Allah is used, some of the government authorities have said, no, you've got to pick some other word, or just retain the word God, in the same way that Muslims on the reverse side say, oh, you can't translate Allah, you have to just keep Allah, as Pickthall said. Allah is for Muslims only, and God is for the rest of the unwashed humankind. So I think on both sides, there's a narrowness. And so my argument is that you can't, barzakh, I come back to that word barzakh, is yes, it's both a term for Muslims and for non-Muslims. In term, Maimonides, when he was writing, he wrote Hebrew and Arabic, he would often say, well, and the larger word for God is Allah. So that, and he was very much a practicing Jew, as we all know. So there's a sense in which names cross cultures and cross different boundaries of meaning, and the difficulty is when it's limited to one. As for instance, I was with my friend who is Mauritian. I didn't say where he's from, but Shaukat Turawa I mentioned as somebody who was a Muslim chaplain at Columbia, now is a professor at Yale, but he's originally from Mauritius, which is in the Indian Ocean. So I said to him, so when you were growing up, because he grew up for a while in Singapore, did you have friends who used the word Allah? He said, oh yes. He said, my Sikh friends. Now this, I completely missed it. The Sikhs, the people who wear the turbans and who live in different parts of the world who are great traders, the Sikhs and many who knew Singapore called on God as Allah. So it's not even just Christians, Eastern Orthodox Christian, Arab Christians, Malay Christians. It's also Hindus in some part of South India, Sikhs in some parts of Southeast Asia. So to narrow it down is to reduce it. And all I was attempting to do, and I say it maybe not often enough or loud enough in this book, is to say this is the way in which it is not merely a word in print or a dictionary etymological puzzle to divine. It's also a way of expressing oneself in animation, as that wonderful Muslim nurse did who said, every day I say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and I'm not sure quite what it means, but can we have a conversation about it? So I would come back to saying it needs to be more problematized and probably more used with greater care about the audience. And my audience here was simply people who take it for granted that Allah is for Muslims only and that there can't be any other resolution. But your corrections or your elaboration and your challenge to my use of it here, I accept fully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ali. I'm a doctor here, physician. I'm from India. So
wait, I'm in double trouble. A doctor and from India. Gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know what your question is, but I'm sure I can't answer. But go ahead, try.
I'm going to keep it down.
Okay.
So being familiar with Urdu, so Urdu always makes a distinction between Ilahi and Allah. So between the deity and then Allah. Mm-hmm. And so I remember growing up, we used to read Abdullah Yusuf Ali, and somebody then introduced Marmaduke Pickthall, and there was this stark distinction between the two. And then that continued for a few years, and then Medina University came out with their reconciliation Quran, so it's all Abdullah Yusuf Ali except Allah. And the way they justify the reconciliation is they go back to perhaps the most important verse of them all, La ilaha illallah. And so they cite that as a simple solution to this conundrum of finding common ground between Ilahi and Allah. And that's the distinction they cite, that therein lies the answer. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, Membihi Aligar Batahu. I'm also an Aligar's child. So for those of you who don't know what that means, is my daughter, I'm very proud to have one of my 2 daughters here in the room, and she's also an Aligar Bala. So Aligarh is the name of a university in North India where I was privileged to be with my daughters and with my family for a couple years in the mid-'70s. And I've retained a close association with, I'm sure you know Aligarh, an Aligarh Muslim university. So I was privileged to remain in contact with people there and to go back there often over the years. And it was a few years ago, and it was only a few years ago, it was not 2016, 3.5 years ago, I was invited back to Aligarh to talk about the 100th anniversary of the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. So for those of you who aren't Muslim or don't know about this, I mentioned him as the one who translated the Surah Al-Duha, the 93rd Surah of the Quran, and called it the glorious morning light, not the daylight or sunlight, but the glorious morning light. So I was invited to come back and talk about it, and to talk especially about the Saudi version of it. So for those of you who don't realize, and this is part of my other book, the book I've done on the Quran and translation, is I was really surprised, even before I went back to Aligarh in 2016, the number of people who said to me, oh, you know, you really can't do a translation of the Quran in English because it's only the Quran in Arabic. It's not just the word Allah, but the whole of the Quran is only really the Quran in Arabic. So any rendition of it is to be reducing it or even distorting it or both. So I went back and I was asked to give this lecture on Abdullah Yusuf Ali. And I cited the very beginning of his, this is a man who, I won't tell you his whole biography, although I do try and summarize it in about 3 or 4 pages in my book on the Quran in English. But I say about Abdullah Yusuf Ali that he was somebody who was completely enamored of the British, but totally grounded in his Muslim upbringing. So he wanted to be both Muslim and British. He wanted to have the barzakh. He wanted to be himself a living barzakh. Neither British nor Muslim, both British and Muslim, a combined thing that couldn't be combined because the two were so different, and yet he wanted to somehow keep them in tandem. So what he did is he spent all of his extra time reading and translating the Quran, and when he finally brought it out, it was a huge success, a major success. But in the introduction he says, my goal is not to have Muslims be so proud of this, but I want English itself to become an Islamic language. And he said, English cannot become an Islamic language unless Allah becomes God. It was a really profound statement. If you're going to translate the whole of it, 6,326 verses, 114 chapters, you're going to translate all of it in English, and you leave Allah as Allah, and don't translate Allah as God, English will never and can never become an Islamic language. So that was Abdullah Yusuf Ali's argument. And whether I accept it or not, I could sense the passion and the commitment with which he made it. So when I was talking to Aligarh, I reviewed what I've just talked about you, and I told another story about Surah Al-Duha that I haven't told you, but I told them in Aligarh. I've traveled a lot. I've traveled to many places. I've told about Asia, but I've also traveled to South Africa. And I was part of a conference there organized by a prominent Muslim scholar. And I was asked to talk about the surah that I like the most, and it was Surah Al-Duha, the one I mentioned here, Surah Al-Duha, which is my favorite surah in the Holy Quran. And this person came up to me afterwards who was a doctor. This is why I'm telling you the story. He's a doctor, but not like you, a different kind of doctor. Because I didn't know what kind of doctor you are, but I know it may be a little different than he is. He comes up to me and he says, I don't understand why you were so attracted to the Arabic of Duha. And I started to recite it. He says, don't tell me that. I don't understand any of it. I said, well, then wait a minute. Why do you think it's such a great surah? He said, because I read Abdullah Yusuf Ali's. And he said, it's when I read Abdullah Yusuf Ali in English that I became Muslim. I said, my God. This is kind of a personal testimony. It's only one person, it's only one South African doctor that I met at a conference back in 2012, 8 years ago. But it was so astonishing that he was so moved by the power of the translation, of the Arabic in translation, that it drew him to Islam and he became Muslim. And he's a very prominent member of the Muslim community in Durban to this day. So I think there's more than just this one tale. There's probably other stories about it. But what the Saudis decided when they wanted to have something that swept everybody and said, this is the definitive interpretation and translation of the Quran. First of all, they got together two people from different parts of the Muslim world. Hadrat Falali, who was from Morocco, and Muhsin Khan, who was from Pakistan. So they got together a Pakistani and a Moroccan scholar, and they said, we want you two to do what is the definitive Orthodox, and they use this word, Orthodox translation of the Quran. Well, the first thing is, you can't translate it with the Arabic text. So you have one column in Arabic and one column in English. And so if you don't like what's in English, you read the Arabic and you get it straight, because the English is just a commentary. But the other thing is, every place in the Basmala and place where there was Allah, it was retained as Allah. But if you read it, as I've read it carefully, many passages are lifted wholesale from Abdullah Yusuf Ali. And they detranslate. Detranslate means instead of translating from Allah to God, you detranslate from God back to Allah. And they do that throughout, shamelessly. So a couple of scholars, including one very major Muslim scholar in a review back in 2005, said, I want to applaud their intention, but I have to despise the results. Because he said, you cannot claim that you are really making a fresh translation when you're taking somebody else's effort, changing it a little bit to your own whim, and calling this Orthodox. It's limiting rather than expanding the horizons of what the Quran could be. So I think I come down more with that critique than I do with the idea that, take whatever you feel is good. It's like a kind of common menu, a sort of open buffet of choices for Islam or for the Quran. And whatever fits you, you take it and you mix and match it. I think there has to be a kind of integrity of purpose. What Ghazali said, no one knows the intention of God, but you have to, when you translate, allow people to know your intention as a translator. So I think it's imperative that Abdullah Yusuf Ali spells it out at the beginning. By the way, the guy who was the opposite end of him, whom some of you may not have heard of as a Quran translator, was Muhammad Asad. Now, I kind of pause when I say the Muhammad Asad, because people say, yeah, I've heard of an Asad. I thought his name was Talal. So there is a very prominent American academic named Talal Asad, who happens to be the son of Muhammad Asad. But Muhammad Asad, in my humble opinion, was the most famous Muslim convert of the 20th century. He said, Malcolm X. No, there's Malcolm X. Okay, I grant you. Malcolm X is really important. I'll even give Malcolm X Avis to his Hertz. No, but I mean, really, or if you want to reverse it, say Malcolm X is Hertz and he is Avis. He's either the first or second. I'll concede that. But the reason why I think he's in the top two, I just changed my mind. He's in the top two, whether you put him one or two, is because he was born Leopold Weiss into a prominent Viennese Jewish family. And Leopold Weiss, in the 1920s, sort of despaired of the way culture was going and the way politics was shaping. This is 1920. I kind of try and remember, it's 1920s and we're now in 2020. Are we reliving history? I don't want to go there. But when I think about what the choices were that he was facing in the 1920s and we're facing in the 2020s, sometimes it does feel like history is repeating itself. But he decided that people who were his immediate family had not correctly embraced Judaism because they practiced some of the rituals, but they didn't really practice daily prayers. They weren't really absorbed by their religious faith. So he, one time, just picked up the Quran, and again in English, not in Arabic, in English. He saw a surah, Surah Al-Kathra, and he was so impressed by it that he converted, and he became Muhammad Asad. So, and then the whole rest of his story was he married a Saudi princess, They had one son, his name was Talal Asad. So the famous anthropologist, scholar of 20th, 21st century America is the son of Muhammad Asad. But then, when he was rejected by Pakistanis because he didn't look Pakistani, he became a Pakistani. But he didn't look like you, and he didn't look like other people who were from South Asia, because he was an Austrian Jew by background. But he was a Muslim and a South Asian Muslim by practice. This guy Pickthall I mentioned, and there's somebody else, Yusuf Ali, whom I mentioned, all these people were prominent scholars. He knew them all. He was in that same circle, and he also spoke Urdu, by the way. Urdu was his third language after German, no, his fourth language after German, English, Arabic, Urdu. Muhammad Asad was also a really quite fluent scholar in Urdu. So when he translates the Quran, he says, not only do you need to do God, but every time you see something that sounds metaphoric, something that sounds unhinged, like the afterlife, you say, well, the afterlife really means whatever life there is after death. It's not sort of heaven aglow with hordis and angels. Everything that was a physical description, he said, is metaphoric. So this whole notion of what is the Quran and what isn't the Quran, he says, everything that is practical, it's like almost like Thomas Jefferson. I don't want to be too strong, but Thomas Jefferson reads the New Testament and says, if it's ethical, it fits. If it's metaphysical, forget it. But he sort of goes through the Quran and says, there's so much great ethical stuff here. I want to bring out the commandments of adl, of ethics, and adab, and the instructions of being what it is to be ta'dib, to be someone who is well behaved. And he does that. So he does a radical rethinking. But anybody who reads it says, okay, he had a conviction, he followed it, he didn't copycat, he didn't mix and match, he did it all the way through. So this is a long answer to your question, but my answer is that I respect what Abdullah Yusuf Ali did, I respect Muhammad Asad. There's several other people I could mention. Tarif Khalidi is another more modern person who had his own notion, a Muslim, a Lebanese Muslim, had a certain idea of what the Quran should be, and he follows it consistently and comes up with a new translation. But when you do a bowdlerized or mix and match or a kind of hit and miss, which is really what it becomes, rendition, as the Saudis unfortunately did with Yusuf Ali and the Khan al-Khalali, I don't think it's a real Quran. That's my opinion. Yes, in the back row. I would have been really disappointed not to have at least one question for a woman. I would have called on my daughter if you hadn't stood up.
Well, I hate to represent women, but okay, so my question is, do people who cling to the untranslatability of Allah, do they think that the people who use that term all have the same idea of when, do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I do know what you're saying.
I would think there would be 1,000, just for shorthand, Allahs, just like when we say God, you know. But then I was thinking as I was sitting that maybe when we use the word God, a greater range is allowed or implied or has been used. As, you know, God has been broadened to many versions of it. Or I don't know. I'm sorry to the women because I'm probably.
So I'm trying to get the core of your question. I think I get this tone of it, but I want to get the core of it. The core of it is, you want to know if there's this broader range of disagreement or variety in Muslim perception, or Muslim Orthodox and others.
Is it an idea that it is all just one thing, that every person who says Allah means the same thing?
No, the same thing, no. But to quote Wittgenstein, who's one of my favorite linguistic theorists, there's a certain resemblance, or even a family resemblance, between people who have all grown up or become Muslim in a certain way. And I was talking with my friend Tibor. He's not only a former student and a current friend, but he's also somebody I talk to. And so when I was talking and he was telling me about his exciting new project on sermons, I said, well, you know, you really should read this book. This is a direct answer, well, maybe not direct, but an indirect and I think pointed answer to your question about is there a difference. There's a new book the call that just came out, or I would have included it more rigorously in my own talk, called Allah, Aleph, which is the first letter for Allah in Arabic alphabet, is the first letter in the Arabic alphabet, and it's the first letter for Allah. A is Aleph in Arabic, A-L-E-F. So the title of this book is Aleph is for Allah. It's kind of nice, isn't it? So what does that mean? Aleph is for Allah. Well, you read the print underneath it, and it says Aleph is for Allah, childhood, emotion, and visual culture in Islamic countries. And it's all about, this is the answer to your question, it's all about how people visualize, internalize, and grasp with the notion of what Allah means. And it's a huge range. First of all, it's a beautiful book. It also has, 80 illustrations of posters or children's books that are written. He probably can't do the whole Islamic world. That's a joke. But he does take 3 countries, all of which, or each of which, has importance in its own right. He picks Iran because not only is it a major Shiite country, but it has set a tone for the way in which Islam is to be reinterpreted after the revolution. So how are Iranian children since 1979, in other words, in the last 40 years, how are they trained to think of Allah? And he does a very interesting paraphrase, but he said you can't know everybody's mind, but you can look at posters, you can look at syllabi, and interview people, and he does. And so even with Iran in the last 40 years, there's a huge variety in what is meant by not Allah, but Khuda. So he even does this register, slipping between, and those of you who are South Asian know Khuda. When you're South Asian, you don't say Allah Hafiz, or unless you've been to Saudi Arabia too often, you say Khuda Hafiz. So he does a whole register on what is Khuda as an inflection of Allah. Then he does Turkey, because he also knows Turkish, and does a whole wide range of Turkish things. And he said, then the question is, how does Allah interact with Tanri? Tanri, which was the Turkish name for God before Islam came. So the whole range of how is Tanri, who is a storm god, by the way. Tanri was a fierce god of nature. So how is Allah always inflected with a kind of range of interaction with natural forces in Turkish cultural literature, especially in the modern period? A whole thing about, first of all, Iranian, then Turkish, and then he really lets loose. He does Pakistani and his poster about children, and why children have to be brought up when they're very young to read the Quran and to read it in the same way for a man and a woman. This is the strangest thing, because you say, well, Pakistan is one of those countries where women are really subordinated. They've got terrible laws against women, against adultery and all this stuff. But the children's education that he examines there, and the way in which the virtuous form or the ideal form of Allah is taught in present-day Pakistan is really phenomenal. So that's a simple answer, not so simple, but as direct an answer I can give you to, is it all the same? No, it's not all the same, but a lot of it has to do with the emotion that's invested in childhood, whether you're a child or not, but how you think of cultivating, as every school, religious school that I know, including Harvard Seminary, but every school that's a lower level, primary level education, that has some notion of religion, is taught for children from the time they're very young, and that shapes their notion of what is Allah or Tanri or Khuda or God. So it's never the same, and it is influenced, in my humble opinion, it's influenced a lot by cultural and historical and social circumstances. And so to just do an etymological play of, oh, Allah means this, or Khuda means this, or Tanri is that, is to miss this other really complex and necessary background which comes from multiple contexts. Yes, another one. Gosh, I'm 2 for 2 now. This is great. I had two men and now 2 women, and I can close up shop after this. No, go ahead.
After this, we have time for one more question, so.
Very small, short question, actually. It's more of an
I didn't ask you who you were. You didn't tell me who you were. I'm sorry to point to you.
My name is Nina.
Okay. Well, that's okay. But I'm glad to have you. Thank you for your question. And tell me who you are.
I'm general public, and my name is Amina Islam, actually, and I'm from Pakistan. I was thinking about, I was actually thinking of bringing up Khuda, because, we've talked about Allah, but Khuda seems to be relevant, as far as I know, more into Southeast Asia. the name of Khuda used against Allah. And there was a few years back, I think maybe 20, 25 years back, that people have started replacing. When we used to say Khuda Hafiz, but people have started feeling a little offensive when you say Khuda Hafiz. Now they start saying Allah Hafiz. So I know, and it's an observation when I go back to Pakistan, but I'm not so sure when I say Khuda Hafiz, would they appreciate it? Should I say Allah Hafiz? So can you shed any light onto that as to why there's a change in thinking now? They don't want to use Khuda as much, and they rather want to use Allah. I think I observed that more about 25 years back. It has started happening, this movement.
Well, you know the word bid'ah.
Sorry?
You know the word bid'ah in Arabic or in Pakistan, bid'ah, innovation, bid'ah.
No,
Oh, bid'ah means innovation. There's bid'ah su and bid'ah khui. There's good bid'ah and bad bid'ah. But basically the idea that there is Allah Hafiz is a bid'ah sui, is a kind of unfortunate bid'ah or innovation, because there's nothing in the whole history of exchange of hello and goodbye. You can say assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You can add that. You know when you greet people in Arabic, assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So you can include that and that's a very gracious and nice way of exchanging greetings in Arabic. But Allah Hafiz, mashallah. I mean, this is sort of taking two different registers and combining and say, oh, I'm now a better Muslim because I'm saying Allah Hafiz instead of Khuda Hafiz. Ghazali answers this in the same book I cited in my lecture, Qanun al-Ta'wil. Ghazali has this wonderful phrase where he says, Islam conquered the Iranian people or the Persian plateau, but when we say our prayers, when we do salat, we don't think Allah, we think Khuda. Because Khuda is what's in. Remember, he's a Persian speaker. This is Ghazali, one of the greatest all-name. Ibn Sina has a similar, but not as quite as sophisticated reckoning, that you can say Allah, but in the back of your register is Khuda. So when it became a custom of how you greet people, it wasn't Allah Hafiz, because that's not the first register for someone who has what I prefer to call a Persian or Persianate. That is, they like the Persian language, but not necessarily all of the pre-Islamic or Persian customs, including birding children. So they never had that kind of thing. But I think Allah Hafiz is only something of the last 30 years. I think if you go back much before 1990, you're not going to find it was ever there. But it became increasingly a way to mark yourself as being from South Asia, because that's the only, it never happened in Morocco. It never happened in Tunisia or Algeria across the Maghreb. It never happened in Southeast Asia, because it's South Asia. We're talking about the Indian subcontinent. We're talking about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Let's not forget Sri Lanka. It's also a part of this mix. But I think that to me it's a bid'ah. It's an innovation which is trying to traffic in a kind of notion of modern orthodoxy, but doesn't have deep roots in the history of either Islam or Asia. So when I go, as I often go to Singapore, I'm invited there, and I'm also invited to Kuala Lumpur, and someone greets me and says, Allah Hafiz, and I said, Khuda Hafiz, Khuda Hafiz. I always repeat it. Because I think it really is this, it's not only the standard way, I think it's the really natural and the positive way of greeting somebody from a Persian or Persianate background.
So we have our last question. I'm sorry, here. There will be time to speak to Bruce afterwards, I think, for a little while, and have some books signed if you'd like to.
Thank you.
Please.
I just have a quick comment.
Yeah, what is your good name?
My name is Awadif. I speak Arabic, and in Arabic, the word Allah is the specific name of God. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a plural. It doesn't have a gender.
Right.
It is not a she. It is not a he. It's Allah.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say God, it's a word that has plural. You say God male or goddess female. So that's why for us, when we think of Allah, it's Allah. It cannot. It has a very unique meaning.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's why my book is called, Who is Allah? Why does it matter? And I give all the resonance to the Arabic tonality of it and the singularity of Allah in Arabic. And what I am trying to say is that it is something that is shared among Arabic speakers, but also people who are not Arabic speakers, like many of the Malay Christians whom I know and the Muslims who are not native Arabic speakers as are you, but they still have this deep feeling for Allah. Even as they say they're Christian and not Muslim, because there is this inflection. And the Turkish, I mean, I teach in Turkey. I've taught in Turkey for the last 8 years. And many of my students are not Muslims, but they still feel this sense, this strong tug of Allah as a resonance, which gives rise to iloveallah.com as a website. And I'm totally sympathetic with that at the expressive, performative level. But I also want to say at the level of Yusuf Ali and all those people who are trying to share the wisdom and the insight, which is deep and broad from the Quran, with multiple audiences. First of all, it's like saying Allah Hafiz. If you say in the name of Allah, it's a misnomer. It should be Bismillah. You know, if you're going to say Allah, it should be Bismillah or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I think if you go part way in a translation, you need to go the next step in it. And what was said so strongly by Muhammad Asad in his beginning of it, when he said, as an Austrian convert, I only knew one word, Gott, G-O-T-T, because that was German, de Gott. But he said, for me, there was always Allah as a guiding force, but I want, again, like Yusuf Ali, I want to make my translation something that all English-speaking people will refer to. And they would not refer to Allah because they don't know what the deeper meaning of Allah is. So it's always, whenever Allah is translated from a Muslim text or from a Christian or a non-Arabic source, it's always in order to make it more comprehensible to a different audience. So I completely agree with you about the deep and untranslatable quality of Allah, but I don't think that then means that the Holy Quran can only be partially translated, and the most important word, the word that comes up most insistently, has to be retained as Allah. So that it's a point of discussion. And by the way, the man I just came from talking with, I spent 6 hours with him yesterday talking about only 4 verses of the Holy Quran, none of which concern Allah directly, but he said that his first commitment as somebody who's a Muslim and a Muslim scholar and also a translator of the Quran, you'll see many passages of his I quote in my books. He said the first thing is you have to translate the whole of the Basmala. He didn't stop only with Allah, but he's the one who, I won't tell you how many conversations we had, but we had whole nights drinking tea until morning saying, how do you translate the Basmala? So it's not just in the name of God, and how do you translate the rest of it? And he said, you must go either for compassion or pity, forget benevolence, because he doesn't think it's strong enough. But compassion or pity are the ways in which you try to grasp something of the rahmah. But you can't say in the name of Allah, the full of compassion, ever compassionate. You have to say in the name of God, full of compassion, ever compassionate. So this is somebody who is practically a native-speaking Arabic Muslim imam, and after a lifetime of wrestling with it, he's only 58, so he may change his mind in the next 20 years if he lives that long. But his feeling is that to translate is also to move from one register to another, and you have to move fully and not halfway. So, thank you all very much. Appreciate you coming.